I'm Lori Lewis. This is Unstoppable Live. We have a recorded audio podcast that's on all the regular channels like Apple and Spotify and everything. And we do a half hour fully produced episode about women in sports. We actually have music that we craft for it. We have a voice actress, Dawn Conrad, who reads the opening script that's about 90 seconds long. And we put sound effects and all this stuff. And then I do an interview with either a woman, a current athlete, a historian. We have coaches, like one of my favorites. Of course, I've become friends with Mike and Heather Winklejohn from Jackson Wink in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yeah, that Jackson Wink. Mike Wink was just at the White House with a couple of his fighters for that big fight. That was kind of exciting. So, Heather does a podcast with us. It's called She Fights. Now, her podcast is actually, even though it's called She Fights, it's about women overcoming trauma of all kinds. So it could be someone who's maybe, had addiction problems in the past, or someone that has had trouble in all kinds of situations, relationships, families. One of the most compelling episodes, in my opinion, was she had a couple of sisters on who they talked about missing Indigenous women, Native American women, and they lost her sister that way. So they actually did a documentary about it, and they were on an episode with Heather's really moving. So I'm waiting for Dr. Leslie Heaphy, and Dr. Leslie, she's a real historian. She's at Kent State, Ohio, as an associate professor, but she is also a historian that works with the Society for American Baseball Research, and she does a lot of the research on the women in baseball history, including the Negro Leagues, which we're going to talk about tonight, and talk about Toni Stone particularly. But she is also with the International Women's Baseball Center out of Rockford, Illinois. Can you believe that? It's like such cool history. Of course, you might know about it because of the movie A League of Their Own, which is having its anniversary right now. So we'll have her on and we're going to talk about some of this fun history. Let me tell you, as I'm waiting for Dr. Heaphy, there she's coming on. But we've had good evening. We're on live on YouTube, and it's nice of Dr. Heaphy to come on. She's several hours ahead of me, so it's 7 p.m. Pacific time. And
So
is
I'm in
it?
Rockford, so it's only 9 o'clock, not 10 o'clock.
Oh,
Normally,
oh,
normally I'd be, but yeah, so I'm an hour earlier because I just arrived in Rockford about a couple hours ago.
oh, wonderful. Well, because events are already starting to happen, right?
Well, not yet,
Not
but
quite. Okay.
we have a lot to do. So yeah, I arrived today and I'll be here the whole month.
How fun. Now, so let's go ahead and right away about the movie and the whole connection with the Rockford Peaches because um, I mean so much history comes out of Rockford, Illinois. Tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing there and all
Yeah,
the
so
events that are going to happen. Yeah.
most people's awareness of women's baseball is because of the movie A League of Their Own, and it is entirely focused on the Rockford Peaches because they are one of the original longest lasting teams in the AAGPBL. And of course, we now have the stadium still exists where they played, and we're rededicating it on July 18th as Maybelle Blair Field at Buyer Stadium to honor Maybelle Blair, our 99-year-old still
Yeah, she's
alive.
still
And
kicking.
yeah, she
Yeah,
is. And
it's
so,
amazing.
yeah, unfortunately, we were supposed to do the rededication in June, but she had a fall. And so we had to postpone it to July 18th. While she broke a couple ribs, but she's
Oh,
coming along, and at
wow.
99,
That's awesome.
we all hope we are. And so, yeah, so that, I mean, and then so that's most people's connection to Rockford and this whole but Rockford has a long baseball history. The Four Cities were one of the original National League team, and so it goes back to the 19th century, and that's why they refer to Rockford as the cradle of baseball. So beyond women's baseball, it's got a huge history, and so it just makes sense that we're going to be here. And so the 18th will kick off with the rededication, and then July 22nd will kick off the World Cup, this group stage, and they'll play from the 22nd to the 26th with a rain date if they need it for the 27th. So yeah, that's what's happening.
So do you know if any of this is going to be streamed at least, maybe on YouTube or anything? Have you heard?
Yes, there's going to be a couple of local TV stations that are showing it. And then the WBSC has their, so if people go on the WBSC website, they'll see who's streaming and where it's going to happen. It's constantly evolving, so they're trying to add is to make it as accessible as possible for people.
Boy, yeah, there's so much going on there. And what our topic tonight is going to be, we're going to talk about the Negro Leagues, and we're
Mhm.
going to talk particularly about Toni Stone, which I love her story, and there are a couple other women in this as well. But I want to tell people, a little bit
Mhm.
about your background, and you've actually written a book about the Negro Leagues and about the women, haven't you?
So I wrote a book, my dissertation turned into my first book on the Negro Leagues, 1869 to 1960. So it covers the basic history of the Negro Leagues. And then I wrote the encyclopedia on women's baseball as a starting point, not as an ending point. Sometimes people think encyclopedias are, no, somebody needed to do it to show what we knew and what we still didn't know. So I'm now working on a second edition that's going to be double the size of the first one because that's what you learn when you write the first. Yeah, and so yeah.
I didn't realize it started as early as 1869. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, right after the Civil War is basically when both women's baseball and efforts with the Philadelphia Pythians for the Negro League for black baseball, trying to play within the Pennsylvania League and not getting allowed to. And so, yeah, it goes back to, as most professional baseball does, right after the Civil War.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing history, like you said. So, okay, tell us about a little bit more about the background of the Negro Leagues, as it was called, and then we'll talk about when women started entering it, but maybe give us a little background, a little
Sure.
setting and stuff. Yeah.
Well, the Negro Leagues officially start in 1920. Prior to that, you have lots of black baseball players and black baseball teams playing from the 1860s all the way forward. We have Moses Fleetwood Walker and his brother Weldy and William White, who all played essentially at the major league level in the 1880s. And so that's why we talk about Jackie Robinson as reintegrating. But the official start of the Negro Leagues is 1920 with Andrew Rube Foster from Texas, who prior to that was a pitcher, manager, owner, and then becomes the founder of this new league and owner still of the Chicago American Giants, president of the league, and pitched some still. And so the Negro National League is born in 1920. At the same time, the Negro Southern League also starts. So we have two leagues, almost a major league, minor league kind of system that starts in 1920. And then the Negro Leagues in various iterations because teams come and go and they revamp themselves as they need to, but they last into 1960. Some will argue a little beyond that, but most of us say 1960 because after 1960, it's hard to call it a league when there's only two teams still existing. So black baseball still exists, but the Negro Leagues. So we usually call 1960. So 40 years is what we're looking at when we talk about the Negro Leagues.
Wow. It's so interesting to me. Well, I was such a huge, still am, baseball fan growing up in the Chicago area. And learning more, I was always into the history, but I'm learning more now. It's so fascinating to me. There was a bit of, it's been kind of hidden history in a way, and
Oh,
now
sure.
people are really just starting to become aware, right?
Yeah. Partly because, well, it's not Major League Baseball. It's not part of the mainstream culture. And so for too long, we have ignored the voices outside the mainstream, whoever those voices happen to be. It doesn't matter, women, blacks, other minorities. And so it's been a slow road to try to bring those stories to the forefront. And so that's what's been slowly happening, bits and pieces. And I think Major League Baseball's efforts to try to recognize and pull in the stats and things like that have certainly piqued people's interest. And that's a good thing, as long as they remember that stats are only one part of the story, and the stories are really what's important behind those numbers. But it's a start, and it's gotten a lot of people interested who have never have been before. And so suddenly the history of Chicago's black baseball and every other city, but Chicago certainly was a centerpiece, are becoming more well known.
Uh, what drew you to this topic?
I guess probably the same thing for a lot of people, baseball fan, baseball researcher, fascinated by the fact that I couldn't find things on some of these players that, and back when I was starting, even back in the late 80s, there was not a lot even about then about Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. Now they're sort of those, at least a few of them are more household names, but back then they weren't. And so I was intrigued by the stories and these names, and I was like, why can't I find anything? Why is nobody written about them? Why is nobody telling their story? And so that's really what intrigued me. As a person who loves baseball and history, it was the combination of the two. And I thought, well, and then it didn't take very long to realize there was a much bigger story beyond the Satchel Pages, Josh Gibson's, Cool Papa Bell. Yes, they are hugely, but they're just the tip of the iceberg.
So with AI right now, it's so easy to like look things up and to research and whatnot. But when you were doing this book, was it hard to find the material? And how do you go about that?
Well, when I started, most of it wasn't digitized, which it is now, and it's a huge blessing. So I had to go and visit archives. So I spent, for example, a summer out in Kansas, in the archives there, going through the collection related to the Kansas City Monarchs. I spent a couple weeks in Philadelphia, going through the collection that they had there. I went to Newark to see the collection for Ethel Manley. Now you can see most of that stuff online. Um, but and then you had to try to talk to people, and 30 years ago, more of them were alive. And so I did have a chance to talk to a variety of players. And so that certainly helped. Today, obviously, very few of them are left, and very few, almost none, who were playing prior to 1950. And so they don't have the background. It's still important stories, but it's different stories.
Yeah.
And so you had to you had to do more hands-on, go places, which is not a bad thing as a historian. We always say you want to go to the original source. And it's great that the papers are digitized, but it's better to go and see it in person and look at things hands-on.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that sounds intriguing and fun, but I've always loved history and archaeology and all these things. Yeah, you want to go. I mean, if you could go see the Great Wall of China, you
You want to
know,
touch it. I mean, that's what
yeah.
you want to touch it, you want to feel it, you want to see it. You don't want to hear somebody tell you about it. It's great when you find it online, but it's like, oh, so just as an example, when I was doing my degrees in Toledo, I was doing an internship, and I was over in the basically what was the longstanding Polish community in Toledo. And I was looking through the Polish newspaper for some things for another project. And as I'm flipping through these newspapers, I come across a single article about this big, literally, written in English. The only one I had seen, which caught my attention. And you know what it was? It was about the Toledo black baseball team playing,
Oh, wow.
and it was written in English in this
What
Polish
odds?
newspaper where
Yeah.
everything else was in Polish except that article.
Oh my gosh.
And to
Well,
see it, if somebody had posted it online, yeah, okay, cool. But I found it in
yeah.
just by accident because it caught my eye because it was written in English.
Yeah, I hope we never lose really that hands-on aspect. I mean, it's,
Well,
that's to me
if
is
we
like the
follow the
heart of it.
tenets, if we follow the tenets of history and history as a discipline, we should never, because the heart of history is always the time and place rule, which is you have to get as close to the time and place of the original and not accept the secondary. That's always the goal.
So you and I did an episode for the Unstoppable Audio podcast, and we did it on Alta Weiss, and
Uh-huh.
so fascinating. Another woman who I was just amazed. I love baseball so much. I can't believe I never got to hear these stories. But it's a great episode if you go to unstoppablepodcast.net. We have fun with that, but just give us a couple lines about that, and then we got to get into talking about Toni Stone and all that cool stuff.
So Alta is a story that I think is a great one for people to realize. Partly, here's somebody who came from a tiny little town, Ragersville, Ohio. I mean, little. You could miss it if you drive past. Literally, I tried to go find the museum and I drove past it a couple times before I figured out because it's in the basement of the church.
Oh,
And there's like three
wow.
buildings in that town. And so here is somebody from a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere who goes on to become, in her day, in the 19 teens, right? To be not just a good female ball player, but a good ball player. That it attracted thousands and thousands of fans to come and watch her play, resulting in the trolley lines actually having to put on extra routes to bring all the fans out to see her. And so that's unique for anybody, but particularly unique for a woman in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And so there's
Right.
a story that everyone should applaud and want to know more about because it's triumph over the conditions of the day.
Right. And the culture. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
just that again, go to unstoppablepodcast.net, and it's on all the podcast platforms. But if you go right to our website, we have all those listed and you can hear more about Alta Weiss. I love that story now. So, okay. So the Negro Leagues, again, started more towards the turn of the century, right? You said, or a little bit
Well,
after
officially 1920. That's the
1920.
actual,
Okay.
yeah. Prior to that, it's black baseball, but the official Negro Leagues, 1920.
Okay. So when did the idea of women starting to play get introduced? I mean, it wasn't that early, right?
Well, actually, if you're just talking about women in general, we can trade. I mean, we know they were playing as early as the 1780s. And then, oh yeah,
Wow.
we have a reference to
Wow.
them. But then we have the first significant women's baseball teams right after the Civil War, the Vassar Resolutes playing in the 1860s. And so from the 1860s onward, we have women playing baseball. We have women
Okay.
involved. People
Yeah.
just don't know the
Wow.
story. And so
Yeah.
they think the All-American League in the 40s is like this. And yes, it is hugely important. It's the first league, but they're not the first women to be playing.
Okay. So let's move forward then a little bit to when Toni Stone wasn't the first to play a woman to play in the Negro Leagues, right? There were a couple of other women.
Well, so no, currently officially she is. The
Oh,
women who
okay.
played before her played against Negro League teams, or
Oh,
one of them, Isabel Baxter. played on a Negro League team, the Cleveland Giants. But here, this is a lesson on Negro League history. In one of the seasons that she played on the Cleveland Giants, they only were in the league for the first half of the season, and in the second half, they went independent, and so they were no longer a league team. And she played in the second half. We have not yet found her on the first half of the year roster, which would prove that in 1933 we have somebody playing. But so far, all we have her is on when they were an independent team and no longer officially part of the league. And that's
Okay.
how, and that's a little confusing, I get. But that, I mean, to be correct, as of right now, Toni Stone is the first that we have
Okay.
officially playing for a Negro League team and not against a Negro League team, because Pearl Barnett in the 1920s played, and then Isabel Baxter in the 30s, but they were not official teams.
So what years, so when do we get introduced to Toni? And first of all, where did she grow up? Tell us a little bit
So
about her background.
Toni was born actually in West Virginia. But the family then moved when she was little to St. Paul, Minnesota. And she actually grew up in the Tri-City area in St. Paul. And so today there's a ball field there named for her. And so St. Paul really recognizes Toni. Bluefield, West Virginia is where she's born. We're hoping one day to get a marker put up somewhere there to recognize that is her birthplace. But she grew up in St. Paul. And so she played in the Sandlots in St. Paul. Played for the black local baseball teams as a teenager. And so that is really where she got her start. And then she moves from there to San Francisco. She plays in San Francisco and then moves from there to New Orleans and plays in New Orleans and then ends up being signed to play in the Negro Leagues.
Do we know how she learned to play the game? I mean, did her family teach
So
her or?
couple there's a couple stories. We know that she learned and played in the neighborhood. And so, as often kids do, right? You play with the others in the neighborhood. And so, part of that. And then there is a story that isn't 100% corroborated. We think it's probably true, but Gabby Street, former Major League ball player, had essentially a school there. And it was an opportunity primarily for young boys, teenagers, like to get some instruction, training, etc. According to some stories, Toni lived in the neighborhood and got her pushed her way into his and got some opportunities there. Hasn't been 100% corroborated, so it's kind of, but we think that that is probably likely. But we know for sure, just learning, playing with the kids in the neighborhood. She was, well, and part of it is we know, I mean, she was a tomboy. Her real name is Marcenia, and she chose to choose the name Toni to make it easier for her to play.
I got a little story that's just to interject. When I was a little girl and I was obsessed with playing baseball, I got to play one summer on a boys' little league team before
Oh,
girls
cool.
were supposed to be
Yeah.
able to. And the coach was one of the fathers at my little Lutheran grade school I went to. And he let me play because I had a great arm. And I had to tuck my hair up under my hat. And they called me Lou Campbell, which was my dad's name instead of Lori Campbell. Uh, so I love that. I love that. Yeah, I could just picture her getting in there
Yep.
and and probably once they saw her skills,
It
right?
was okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so how long then before the idea of getting to be a professional was introduced for her?
So she starts playing in San Francisco in 49 and is signed by the Indianapolis Clowns in 53. So it's only 4 years from that initial for her to get signed in 53 with the Indianapolis Clowns as their second baseman. And of course that starts the argument that goes on right to the present day. Did she get signed as a publicity stunt? because it's 1953 and the Negro Leagues are in trouble, right? And so I get where so that's the question everybody always asks, given the timing. Is it, and you couldn't say, well, yeah, a good business person, which Sid Pollock was, would say, absolutely, there's an element of that there. It has to be, right? It's 1953, and you're trying to look for ways to put people in seats. But I would also argue that only works the first time. If
Right.
she's not any good, people don't come back. And they wouldn't, right? Because the novelty wears off pretty quickly, even back then. I mean, today it would wear off in 20 seconds because you can put it out on social media. But even back then, newspapers pick up on that and people hear, and they wouldn't come back if she was not worth seeing. And so I think that alone starts to make the argument that she was a legit ball player. Her first season with the Clowns, she hit 243. Some
Wow.
accounts say 253, so some depending on, but somewhere, and she made the All-Star team.
Wow.
And yes,
Yeah.
part
Yeah.
of All-Star teams are always a little bit of a publicity, but people don't vote and on the all unless, and it was a people vote just like it is now, and she got elected to the All-Star team and then got signed the next year by the Kansas City Monarchs.
Wow.
So
And
she's not a one and done.
and her teammates wouldn't have put up with it for very long
No,
because you don't want to be losing games,
no, of
so
course not. And that's
yeah.
something that people tend to forget, sometimes they focus on the stories and the tall tales of sort of the antics and the clowning and things like that. But even when that was going on, whether it was the Indianapolis Clowns or the Zulu Cannibal Giants or the Harlem Globetrotters baseball team, um, they were still about winning. And so you could only go so far because no professional wants to lose, right?
Right.
And so you want the best players out there that are going to help you win. And so clearly she was part of that scenario and part of that picture.
Okay, so tell us about the first team she was on with the Clowns. Who were her teammates and a little bit about that.
So the Clowns, when she joins them in 53, had just had Hank Aaron previously
Right?
as a teenager. He's gone. And so you'll read accounts that she takes over for him. It's not quite that. Uh,
Oh,
she didn't literally get hired to take his place. But it just so happens that he was there and then he's gone and Tony comes onto the team. So
okay.
but yeah, so Tony is the new draw for the team. There aren't, and the Clowns are a decent team. They're not going to be at the top of the heap. And so that's again where the argument comes from that Tony is there as a publicity stunt, right, to help that team. Sid Pollock is the owner, and Sid Pollock was known for he was kind of, if people are familiar with baseball history and they think of Bill Veeck and all the crazy stunts that Bill,
Chicago White Sox, yep.
right. And so Sid Pollock was a little bit like that. And
Okay.
so I think
Yeah.
that's also where that sort of reinforces that story that this is about publicity more than anything else. Um, but Pollock was a businessman and had long been a businessman and will continue to be. And again, I would make the argument a good businessman understands what it takes and what it continues to take, not a one-time deal.
By the way, did Hank Aaron go up to the majors from the Negro Leagues?
He did not immediately, but yes, he did.
Ah, I mean, I know he, yeah, he eventually did, but I just mean, is that where he left to? But, or did
He
he play
went
for
to
another,
he had short minor league before he
you know,
went up to the
yeah,
majors. So it wasn't
okay.
like he left and went immediately.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so those leagues though were loaded with talent. Who else was on the team that we might know their name or
So
know something about that?
the the year she in 53, Buster Haywood was
Okay.
the manager, and they finished in third place. So a decent season for them. Haywood was a long time manager, player manager. Um, and he was the key to that team's third place finish. They also had a lot of the other players. This would be to your point about stories we don't know. I'm going to mention a couple of names, and people are going to say, I don't know who these people are. And that's good because I want you to go look them up. So, John Wyatt, Woody
Okay.
Smallwood, James Tuggerson. And you're going to say, I've never heard of those names. Buddy Downs, who was sort of one of the clowning part of that team. Um, Henry Speed Merchant was probably one of the, and you can guess by his nickname what he was known for. He was probably one of the more well-known players. Most of the others were never really made it big, never got a
Hmm.
chance to move on to the minor leagues and the major leagues. So people don't, that's why I think people don't know their names.
One of my best friends in the world, Ray Scott, I think he's 87 now. He was the first black man to win NBA Coach of the Year in 1974. He was one of the top 30 Detroit Pistons of all time. But when he was a young man, um, African Americans, black
Uh-huh.
people, people of color were not playing in the NBA yet. And so
Right.
he grew up not seeing this, but he actually got offered to play for the Harlem Globetrotters at one point
For the
before
basketball
he,
team?
yeah, for the basketball team, right?
Okay.
Yeah, because Ray's 6'9", so yeah, that was his game. So, but he said these guys were serious players. These were not, oh, sure, they
And
were, doing these antics, but he's like, these were some of the best players to ever play basketball. So we
well,
can't
that's
go just because there were antics. It
right.
wasn't serious, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. People look at the Harlem and the Harlem Globetrotters are still around, right? And they're entertaining, they're all of that. But that only works if behind that all there is a level of skill that is amazing that allows them to still play and win and be entertaining. But what people don't understand is there's a history behind that entertainment that goes back into the 19th century to the minstrel shows. And it really has to do with how Black people, Black entertainers, whether they were athletes or whatever, had to conduct themselves to be accepted by white
Right.
society. And so the entertainment, in part, was to make them more acceptable, to present themselves in a way that white society could say, that's what we expect from, right? And it allowed teams to come into small towns and say, okay, we can't beat this team 30-1, right? And so, because that would that would not go over well. So we'll play the clowns and we'll entertain them the way they think we should. But behind all of that, we'll end up still winning the game, but we'll win a more respectable, right? We'll win 5-3 or we'll win 7-2 or we'll, right? And I think that's the part that most people don't understand.
So how much did they play? I mean, as far as the league in the Negro Leagues, and how much did they travel? I assume they were traveling by bus at that point or train.
So by the 1950s, when Tony is playing, they're still traveling mostly by bus and car. It's just the nature of what they could afford. Uh,
Sure.
Trains really weren't much of an option. We haven't hit Brown versus Board of Ed doesn't come till 54. And that
Mm,
really blows up the whole separate but equal. And remember Plessy versus Ferguson, that original separate but equal actually officially started with trains. And so it made it, I mean, that was the official target. So they're mostly traveling by bus if the team has a bus, but or a bunch of cars. Um, Typical Negro League teams in any given season played anywhere from 60 to 80 league games, and then 120 to 150 barnstorming games, which were you go and you play anybody who's willing to play you. And that's where a lot of the entertainment value comes in, a lot of the extra stories, tall tales, because you're doing it to make a paycheck. You're doing it to keep your team afloat, right? You're traveling from New York to Chicago. So what do you do on the way there? You don't just take 4 days to travel. You stop and you play games along the way in order to make extra money. And so that's where Negro League teams survived. So that's where, Sid Pollock and others figured out that they needed to give people value for their money. And so you add all this extra entertainment. So you're not just getting a baseball game, you're getting Jesse Owens racing against a horse, all of the things that you hear people talking about in order
yeah.
to say, okay, I got my money's worth.
Okay. I love doing our Unstoppable podcast because we're highlighting all these women that I mean, I'm learning so much doing it, and we're talking about women that are currently playing, and we're talking to coaches and all these different people. But this is fun. This is why I started this live because I get to totally geek out here. Um, I love history and I love sports, so it's like, ooh, I have my own historian here now, so we could just go delve into this as long as we want to, you know. So, all right, so there I'm going to say, was Toni the only woman then at that point on any of the
No,
teams? Okay,
no. So Tony
interesting.
starts in 1953. And then at the end of the 1953 season, she gets picked up by the Kansas City Monarchs. So the Indianapolis Clowns sign two new women to replace Toni. And those women are Connie Morgan and Mamie Peanut Johnson. Um, Connie Morgan was from Philadelphia and Mamie Washington, D.C. Connie was a infielder and Mamie was pitcher. Toni, of course, was a second baseman shortstop. So you have two infielders, and then you have Mamie, who is the pitcher. And Mamie is the one that most people know. If they know something, they know a little bit about her because she lives longer than the others. And so she has an opportunity to tell her story a little bit more. But Connie grew up in the Philadelphia area, and from all accounts, she's the one we know the least about, actually.
Hmm.
But what we do know is Connie was both a baseball player and a basketball player. And she played locally for a team called the Honey Drippers, and appears to have been an incredible athlete, which allowed her to play both sports. And so she signed for the 54 season with the Clowns. And then Mamie comes in as the pitcher, nicknamed Peanut because she was about 5'2". So she
Oh, okay.
earned the nickname. And so Mamie is the first pitcher, female professional pitcher. And Mamie's story is a little bit known because if people have seen the movie A League of Their Own, they will remember that scene where there's a young black girl with her friend who comes in and throws the ball back. That is supposed to be based on Mamie Peanut Johnson, who did go to a tryout and got turned away. And of course, in
Hmm.
later life, said that that was the best thing that ever happened to her because she got to play in the Negro Leagues. Um, because then she got to be
Yeah.
the first professional pitcher. And that's the beautiful thing when you can look back on it. I'm sure at the time it wasn't quite, but she did end up being the first then professional female pitcher, because the All-American League basically had an unwritten rule that they were not, I mean, even though it was a women's league and they're trying to break barriers there, it's the 1940s and 50s, and they were not signing people of color. Even when
Yeah.
they brought in the Cuban players that they brought, they were all Cuban white players. They
Hmm.
were not people of color. And so Mamie gets turned away, but that's why people sometimes connect with her. And then later on in life, Mamie went on after her career was over. She was a nurse for many years. And then she actually owned a memorabilia store, a Negro Leagues
Oh,
memorabilia store in Washington, D.C.
cool.
And so a lot of people would go there and then she lived long enough to meet Monet Davis, who in 2014, of course, became the first young girl to pitch in the Little League World Series and pitch a complete game shutout. And so Monet got to meet Mamie because Mamie was still alive. And so
Wow.
and I think that brought Mamie's story forward as well, because how cool is that? That the two of them got to meet and talk and so that I think added to that particular story.
By the way, do you collect souvenirs? Do you have a bunch of, photos and memorabilia yourself?
Yeah, I do. I'm not a big I tend to collect more when I meet people, I'm more interested in a photograph than something else. But yes, I do have. And so I have a baseball signed by Connie, Mamie, and Tony. I didn't obviously get the signatures, but someone did, and
Right.
so I do have one. And there aren't,
That's
as
cool.
far as we know, there aren't too many of those out there. And so it's kind of a unique
Probably
piece.
not. Yeah.
And I've certainly I met Mamie a number of times. I didn't meet the other two because they passed away much earlier. I did get a chance to meet Mamie probably 4 times. Um, got to sit and watch a baseball game with her, the
Wow.
Cleveland Guardian. Well, back then they were the Indians. I did get to sit and watch a baseball game with her and listen to her talk about the players. Um, and what you realize
How
when you listen
fun.
to her talk was male, female, it doesn't matter. They're ball players. And they talk about baseball the same way. They tell tall tales. They get upset. It was hilarious listening to her as she would yell at the
That's
umpire. She
awesome.
would talk about, and so yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I just sat there listening. Because what are you gonna say? It was purely there to be able to have that opportunity to listen to her talk. Yeah, so
Okay, what more do we know about Toni Stone? Okay, I mean, she got married, I believe,
yes.
at
So
some
her
point.
husband was Alberga was and so she becomes Toni. Well, she was listed as Toni Stone, but officially Marcenia Alberga, because that was his name. He was about 33 or 34 years older than her.
Wow.
Which yeah. How that happened, not entirely sure, but ultimately, in after her baseball playing career was over, she was a nurse and she ended up taking care of him until he passed away, and then continued in her nursing career, never really being known while she was alive much.
Hmm.
It really wasn't until long after she passed away, with interest in the Negro Leagues sort of growing in the late 90s and into the 2000s, that people came back and looked at her story. And so since then, um, Martha Ackman has written a book about her. So people can find that book. There is a play that exists about
Oh,
Toni
wow.
Stone. And
Cool.
then in St. Paul, they have renamed one of the ball fields there as the Toni Stone Field. So she has received a number of accolades posthumously, for which sadly is not all that unusual in terms of recognizing these players. And then at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, part of their additions to their original exhibits is a section that honors the three women. So it has Connie, Mamie, and Toni all recognized there, which is really cool. Um,
Yeah, that
and
is.
and then if people listen to Bob Kendrick from the Negro Leagues Museum, he always talks about the three women who play, because it is unique. I mean, it most people, don't realize that women played baseball. They always think it's softball, and it's like, no. And they played it professionally.
Yeah. I always like to, well, think about if I was in this situation, but how did she get along with the other players on the team? And do we have quotes from some of the men that she played with talking about her?
Yeah, so from all accounts, and there aren't a lot, but from her own couple interviews that were done with her, she talks about mostly being accepted for the most part. Basically just having to prove that she belonged. And once she did, there really wasn't an issue. The biggest issue, not surprisingly, was where did she change? You know, because I
Right.
mean, that's still an issue right at the present day, because a lot of ballparks don't have for the female umpires and things like that. So that was always, but she, for the most part, and then you get a few quotes from some of her teammates and things. And for the most part, it was all about, hey, she could play. And so as long as she could play, we didn't care who she was. For the most, that's the general gist of what you hear. And you don't, with the other two, Connie, again, we don't have any real solid interviews with her or anything, so it's hard to say.
Wow.
But Mamie, um, some of it's Mamie. She loved to tell stories, so you're never sure. But Mamie sort of said the same thing, that for the most part, once she proved herself, though she did tell a story once that I've never been able to corroborate, except she said it. So I've added it to the tall tales about Luke Easter. Um, and so Luke Easter, if people don't know, big, tall, powerful hitter, right? And Mamie's, 5'2". And according to her, Easter basically came out and did the usual go home, be in the kitchen kind of thing. And
Hmm.
she told him to shut up and get up there and bat, and she would strike him out. And then, according to her, she did. Now, never been able to corroborate that, but it's a great story. And it fit Mamie in terms of how she, but it
Huh.
says something about even her recognizing the need to say, yeah, we were accepted as long as we could perform. And, and from all accounts, they were all solid ball players.
So there's another story that's pretty well known that Tony Stone actually got a hit off of Satchel Paige, and I've read that historians think that's sort of a tall tale.
Yeah.
What have you seen
So
about that or read about that?
So the problem with the story is, and I can't remember off the top of my head, so I apologize, but the date and the year that she supposedly got the hit off him, he was playing already in the major leagues. And so he wasn't on the team that she would have been playing against. And so there's never been any ability to connect the time and the year. And they've never found a box score. They've never found an article that actually says from the time that says she did that. It's just her later relating it and saying that that was the best experience. And that doesn't mean it didn't happen. But to date, we haven't been able to find, as good historians, right? The ability to corroborate that story and say, yes, for sure it had. So right now, sadly, it sits in the tall tales.
Okay. I was just looking up Satchel Paige and, while we're
Yeah,
talking.
yeah,
And plus, I wanted to say hi to people who are watching and thank you so much. And if you're watching this later, if you want to ask a question, I can always send that to Dr. Leslie and
yep,
have her send an answer. So please feel free to do that and say hi in the comments underneath. So,
sure.
yeah, but really, so when did Tony stop playing professionally? And
After 1954.
after 1954, so then all we know is then she took care of her husband
Yep.
pretty
And
much, and
had had a nursing career.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah.
wow,
As often happens, particularly with the Negro League ball players, once their playing days are over, they kind of disappear into and sadly, our best resource is newspapers, and they didn't tend to cover those stories, right? Once you were not doing something that they deemed newsworthy, hard to track down. And they didn't have any kids, so we can't follow their story by interviewing family members, things like that. Um, Frank White, who is a historian who lives in the St. Paul area, is probably the leading expert on Tony, simply because when he wrote his book about black baseball in the St. Paul area, he grew up there and he was able to go around and talk to locals about what they
Yeah.
remembered. And he's the one that led the effort to get the ball field renamed for Tony, and
Oh,
then helped set up the exhibit that the St. Paul Saints have in their in their museum. If you go to the St. Paul Saints stadium, in their museum, you go in there and you see all the history, but Tony is featured.
oh,
And Frank
that's so
White
cool.
was partly responsible for helping make sure that that happened, because Frank understood the importance of black baseball to the community and the role that Tony played in all of that.
Yeah, when so I know you cover, different eras and, different figures, but what would you say is your specialty in baseball?
I'm I'm a little bit of an eclectic kind of
Okay.
all around, because I'm really fascinated by the lesser stories. So the Toni Stones, the Connie Morgans, the Alta Weisses, the Maud Nelsons, the Saul Whites, right? The people. Yes, I love Satchel Paige and all those guys, but I really am always more intrigued by the stories that you don't know. So,
Hmm.
I've written an article about barnstorming. I wrote an article about umpires. I've written, so I tend to focus. I know a lot about black baseball in Ohio because I live in Ohio. So
Yeah,
so I sort of pick and choose. Um, but overall, I've got a pretty general knowledge overall, and then I focus on the stories that usually take me down a rabbit hole, and I'm like,
I love
I wonder what that is.
that.
Ooh. So, for example, we just had our Negro Leagues conference, our annual conference in Memphis, just a couple weeks ago, and I was doing our educational program, and so I decided to focus on a team that I figured nobody in the audience probably knew much about. And it turned out I was right, because it was the Tennessee Brown Rats. And people were like, what?
What?
And first of all, they weren't from Tennessee, they were from Missouri. And so, but it was a
Okay.
tradition because of the rivers to talk about rats, brown rats in the rivers. And so they became the Tennessee Brown Rats. But the actual reason they were called the Brown Rats was because the owner of the team's last name was Brown. So it had nothing to do with
Okay.
their color of their skin, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the kind of stories that I like,
You're
because I
fun.
was like,
Yeah.
I bet nobody knows much about them. And it turned out they didn't. And it was kind of cool.
Okay, this is for my fun. Um, but give us a little mini lesson on barnstorming because I just find that era so fascinating.
So barnstorming, by definition, just simply meant for baseball, not in its broader definition, because barnstorming literally came from the word had to do with planes, and they would fly over I mean, so that's literally where the term comes from. But in baseball, it simply meant games that were not they didn't count for any league kind of, and so it literally was you played whoever was willing to take up your challenge, no matter if it was an amateur team, a high school team, a college team, another professional team. And so barnstorming, particularly for the Negro Leagues, is the lifeblood of why they are able to exist, because it paid the bills. But literally, that's how baseball white or black, got introduced to so many communities around the country because this is before television, this is before any of the opportunities to, and so you got to see the best of the best come into your little small town, and you all came out to see them play. And so it would be amazing to be able to go back and talk to some of those people who saw Satchel and Josh and Cool Papa Bell and Turkey and others in their tiny little towns and their reactions to these incredible ball players that never made the majors, that never had an opportunity, and we don't unfortunately get to do that, but we know it happened. The newspapers covered them dramatically, and so you get these great stories of, the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Memphis Red Sox, and the list goes on, ending up in small towns, excuse me, like Zanesville, Ohio, or Canton, Ohio, or Massillon, all in my neighborhood. And then you can take that same thing and put it in any state and say, this is how people got to see the best. And that's how they got to see some of these great white and black ball players actually play one another because they played in barnstorming games. They played against one another, even though, Babe Ruth never got to hit against Satchel Paige in the majors. These teams played one another. They
Yeah.
played in the United States, they played in Latin America, right? And they played against one another through those opportunities. And that's what gives us a sense of the level of play, the excellence of these ball players, when people can say, okay, we don't know the level. Well, we do know some of the level of the play because they played against major league ball players. They played against minor league ball players, right? And they won a great deal of the time.
There's a little baseball field. My husband grew up in New Mexico, and
Okay.
I've lived there a couple of times,
Okay.
myself. And there's a back way from Albuquerque to Santa Fe on the
Okay.
14. It's one of the most beautiful drives in America, they say. I mean, and there's spots you're driving through there. It looks like you could be 300 years ago, It's stunning. But in the town of Madrid, not
Okay.
Madrid, people in New Mexico love to, just like different states love to
Right.
mispronounce.
Hey, the
Like,
locals get to call it whatever they want.
all right. There's a little baseball field,
Okay.
and it is billed as the first field in America to have electric lights. You know, I just love that story, and
Yeah.
you
And
you
and
might
so
have
I
to
think,
check that out. Yeah.
well, yeah, because depends on how they define electric lights. Are they
Ah,
portable or are they permanent? Because
there you
the
go.
portable electric lights, we've got a pretty good idea, belong to the Kansas City Monarchs in the early 1930s, beating the major league teams. But that's what's fascinating about that's what makes all of this so fascinating, right? Because every small town has a story. If
Yeah.
you so I was oh, when was I out there? I guess the end of May. There's a tiny little town in sort of the northwestern corner of Ohio called Alger, Ohio. It's a town of just over 800 people, literally. And so I went out there because they were doing a rededication of their baseball park for Ray Brown. And people are going to say, who? Well, Ray Brown, of course, was a Negro Leaguer who was elected to the Hall of Fame in 2006. So they have a Hall of Famer from this tiny little town. And after lots of
Wow.
controversy and efforts, they and it was beautiful. I mean, the park is gorgeous, but they had this incredible event that I was invited to because I was part of that 2006 election committee. And so I went out, and I think all 800 people from the community were there
Oh, wow.
because this was their, I mean, it was an amazing event. They had the high school kids, the band come out and play. They had Governor DeWine, the governor of Ohio, was there.
Wow, that's so cool.
And he spoke, and and he came because it turns out, well, he went to Ohio Northern, which is like 10 minutes away from Alger, Ohio, for law school. So it was for him, it was kind of coming back. But he's a huge baseball fan. He's a season ticket holder for the Reds. And so he
Wow,
came.
I love
So
that.
imagine, I mean, this tiny little town that has this opportunity to sell and make this connection through this baseball player.
Okay, I got obsessed with now looking up the town of Madrid baseball
Okay.
field.
I figured that's what we all get these rabbit holes, right? You're like, I gotta go look. I gotta go look.
Okay, yeah, this is cracking me up. Oscar Huber Memorial Ballpark. Okay,
Okay.
so let's see what I just have to,
Yeah. Because I'm not
read a
familiar.
little bit about this. Yes. Um, so it says that
Oscar
the
Huber.
Madrid ballpark, the first lighted ballpark, oh, in New Mexico and possibly North America, was built in 1920 by the Employees Club in the, I say Cub right away, like Chicago Cubs, um, in the old coal mine days. And the grandstand with its unusual tin roof was added in 1928. Yeah, it was a coal mining town. And also, I
Okay.
think they mined turquoise there too. And it's this, a lot of people have been there because Santa Fe is one of the hugest,
Right.
vacation destinations. And this is a little town that's about halfway between Albuquerque just in the mountains. And it's a
So
funky
here's
little
another
town.
article says it, this one says it
Yeah.
was the first lighted baseball park west of the Mississippi. So
Okay.
so it's the first
There's all these
lighted in New
distinctions. Yeah.
Mexico, it's the first lighted, it's the first one west. But this is what makes baseball, I think, so fascinating beyond what literally the stats that, fascinate some people is these cultural stories, these
Mm.
questions, these tall tales, these claims to that allow a community to embrace that history and claim it as the example I just gave of Alger, Ohio, like I thought all 800 people were probably there. And so they have embraced this gentleman and his history as part of their own history. And this is how the stories come alive and get remembered and get passed on and don't get forgotten. And that's exactly what we need to see happen. So all of these things are really cool.
It's sort of fun. It's like the old, remember, oh, George Washington slept here. Well, I
Mhm.
just heard a story the other day. They said, well, George Washington didn't sleep here, but we think he drank out of our well. It's like, okay, and there's a plaque, so it's like, hey,
Well,
you know.
so I was at the Alamo, right? And the hotel that is the old hotel that supposedly is where Teddy Roosevelt put out the call for the Rough Riders, right? Um,
Oh,
I'm walking through the hotel and they have this booth in the back and they have gone farther than, well, Teddy Roosevelt was here. Instead, someone has carved into the booth and this is their claim to it says TR WUZ was here. And you're like, that is not historic, people. But they're like, but this is
it's
what we
not?
do, right? I know. But you're like, you really think Teddy Roosevelt wrote WUZ as his Teddy Roosevelt was here? I do
Yeah.
not think so.
Oh, that's so funny though. But oh
But
yeah,
yeah.
I I know there are books on, you know, the major league ballparks, and
Mhm.
me growing up in Wrigley Field, basically, I love those historic parks. But I wonder if anyone's ever done a book, probably on these little fields all over the place, like this Madrid
Oh,
one,
there's a book called Green Cathedrals, which was an attempt to try to put together stories of all of the ballparks, Negro League, minor league, major league, in one place. And
Wow.
it's a start. But if people are interested, I mean, that's a great place to start. It's called Green Cathedrals. It's a wonderful book. Got lots of photographs, things like that. It'll introduce you to ball fields you have never heard of. And that's all it was, as often happens. somebody has to start it to get other people to say, "Oh, but my ballpark is missing," or and so there's
Yes.
a couple of groups of people now currently trying to build off of that and map all these ballparks and figure out when they were built, so there's a variety of efforts to do exactly what you're talking about because there are so many, and how do you corroborate a claim like the one in Madrid,
Thank you.
that it is what it is. And then you've got the Birmingham field and you've got Hinchliffe and then you've got Hamtramck and you've got and they all have these claims to fame. And that's great, but in order for people to really accept, it can't just be tall tales, because then people see that as exaggeration and not true.
Well, then it's urban
And
myths and legends,
yeah, and
Yeah.
those are great and they
Yeah.
serve their purpose as well, but being able to actually say, no, here's the evidence that shows that this is what happened here, right? And that this is that's what we want just because it makes the stories more believable to people and more real, I guess.
So I have at least two more questions here for
Okay.
you. Hopefully, it's not getting too late there for you. But is there anything about Toni Stone that we missed that we want to tell people?
I
Uh,
don't think
you,
so. I mean, I
okay,
think we captured her. I mean, I guess
cool.
my thing always is for people to really acknowledge her as a solid ball player and not just an attraction and not just to put butts in the seats. I mean, like I said, she played in St. Paul, San Francisco, New Orleans. That's not the sign of somebody who is just there for entertainment.
Having played a little bit myself, I could tell you if she was batting 250 and she had professional pitchers winging the ball at her and
Yep.
she was getting hits, that shows you right there that she was the real
hmm
deal, you
Yep,
know?
absolutely. I mean, most major league teams today, if you've got an infielder batting in the 250s, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, just to stand up there with that ball coming at you,
Yep. Yep.
Uh, so we know that too. So yeah, now you're seeing I am such a history nerd. I just love all the details. I remember as a teenager in Chicago going on a field trip to the Chicago Historical Society, and I just still remember, the docent that took us around and telling us things like, well, it's not called the Windy City because it's so windy. Lots of cities are windy, but it was because of the windy politicians. They were
Right.
all full of hot air. And,
Yep.
it's like, oh, I forever now, 40 years later, I still remember that, 50
Well,
years
it's like
later. Gee.
I was telling, my students always remember the craziest things. And like, for example, William McKinley got stuck in a bathtub. No, actually, he didn't. They were concerned that he would have trouble getting out of the old clawfoot bathtub. And so they carried it out of the White House to bring in a new one. And that got a newspaper reporter who said they moved it because he got stuck in it because he was a big man. Not true, but that's all people remember about McKinley is they think he got stuck in the bathtub in the White House. And I'm like, no, he actually didn't. Here's the truth behind that story.
Oh man. Just I do this thing where I even when I was a teenager, I'd be watching an old movie. I love old movies,
Mhm,
um, from the golden era of Hollywood and all that.
mhm.
But I'd be watching a movie and say it's like Samson and Delilah or something like that, and I'd be going, "Is that really what happened?" I have to stop the movie and I start researching everything because it's like
Well,
I want to
and
know
that's what
what
yeah,
was
and
the real story.
that's what you hope people, I mean, I think that's why what you're doing is so important because, you know, we mentioned a name and you mentioned the Madrid ballpark. If somebody's listening, maybe they're going to get inspired to go down a rabbit hole and figure out what's what's true? Is it really the first lighted ballpark? Is it the first one in New Mexico? Is it right? I mean,
First
I
one,
think
yeah.
that's why I mean, for me, that's what makes history so fascinating, just in general, is you hope to inspire people to go and do their own research, you know. And so you asked me about, well, who were Tony Stone's teammates? Well, I mentioned some of the names. So, and I said, the vast majority of people have no idea who Henry Speed Merchant was or James Tuggerson, right? Or even Buster Hay, you know, the manager. And so maybe somebody is going to go and feel inspired to look them up and find out a little bit more about them. And that will help promote their stories and keep those stories alive and growing and give voice to those people who never had a chance to tell their stories.
So many adults get into history. It's always been this popular thing to say, "Oh, I hate history. It's so boring." And it's like, no, once you get past, high school and even college, then all of a sudden you're like, wow, it's
Yeah,
endless what you can learn.
we usually, I mean, I hear them. I've been teaching for 30 years. Trust me, I've heard that multiple times every single semester. And then students figure out that it's not history they hate, it's the way it was taught to them.
Ah,
And it's the whole idea that we teach it as names and dates and you got to memorize stuff. And it's like, yeah, but if all you know is Tony Stone played for the Indianapolis Clowns in 1953 and that's it, what do you really know? So memorizing a name and a date, yeah, I'd be bored too. It's the stories behind those things, right? It's why? And why that team and why 1953 and who signed her and what did she do
yeah.
and where, and as you asked, where did she come from and what was her how did she end up there? Well, because she got started playing as a teen, right? And had this long career before she even ended up in the Negro Leagues.
I just thought of something I didn't ask is obviously I've seen pictures, but she didn't have to wear those little short skirts like the
Of
All-American
course
girls
not,
did.
because yeah, no, because she was a member of a
A
professional Negro
professional
League
league, yeah.
team. And
Yep.
so none of the women who played in the Negro Leagues wore because, and that's a story in and of itself, right? Then somebody should ask me, well, why did the others have to wear skirts? Well, that was because Philip Wrigley insisted because it's 1943 and his whole purpose for starting the league was to provide a replacement, well, for the men who had been drafted until they came back. And his whole goal was for people to remember, first and foremost, that they were women playing a sport and not that they were ball players. And
Hmm.
so for him, it was all about the look. And so, so just that simple question suddenly has a whole story behind it, right?
Yeah, Philip Wrigley, of course, Chicago again. I'm a little Chicago
Um,
area girl. And by the way, and fellow people from Illinois will know this, if you live even 50 miles, outside of the Chicago area, you say you're from Chicago because I don't know, because otherwise I'm gonna go, well, I'm from North Lake, Illinois, or we said North Lake. Who's gonna know where that is? We
right,
were 20 minutes out north of Chicago, of the city. But
right.
what we mean the Chicago land area, the whole thing, right? But yeah, but my family did have a big baseball history, and I remember you didn't play baseball. I think you said you were in track, right?
Yep, I ran track and field, I ran cross country. That's
Yeah.
what I did. Yeah, no, I was not. I was not a ball player.
Yeah, and
Eye
so
hand coordination was not my thing.
I can still throw a ball, so I was at the beach
Oh, I
not
can
too
throw
long
a
ago.
baseball and I can catch
Can
it
you?
when it's thrown at me, but and I can field a baseball. I just couldn't hit worth
Hmm.
a at all, at all. And so, yeah, no, it was not. Yeah, no, I like just playing cat. I mean, I like throwing the ball. That was my
Yeah.
favorite thing to do. Other than that, I was not very good at any of the rest of it.
I told my husband I'm going to be 66 next week. And I told him one of the things I want is a baseball glove and a ball. And for us to get out and play catch again. Because,
Oh,
it's like
cool.
the
Yeah.
older you get, the more you want to connect with that little
Yeah.
kid in you,
Absolutely.
it's fun.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
all right.
I
Well,
played catch when I went to Alger, Ohio, because I threw out the first pitch on the new field.
oh, did you? Oh,
But I
fun. Oh my
insisted. I
gosh.
made the young man who was going to catch, I said, we're going to go practice. And he's like, you want to practice? I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to make a fool of myself. And I haven't done this in a long time. And so I made him practice with me. It was fun.
How cool. Well, let's tell people again a little bit about, so you're in Rockford, Illinois right now.
I
And
am.
by the is Rockford, I'm going to take a guess just from memory. Is it about 90 minutes or 90 miles outside of Chicago? Something
It's
like
only
that?
about a little over an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's an easy ride from Chicago. And so if people are in Chicago and they're looking for an amazing opportunity to watch baseball some unique baseball this summer, July 22nd to the 26th, the group stage for the Women's World Baseball World Cup. You have to say baseball because with soccer going on right now, it gets confusing. But it's
Right.
Women's Baseball World Cup, and this is the group stage. 6 countries from around the world. So the United States, Mexico, Canada, Korea, Hong Kong, and Australia will all be here playing 15 games over those 5 days. And
How
you're going to
cool.
see some of the best baseball you've ever seen. And so take advantage of the opportunity and come check it out.
And then what a great opportunity to bring, your young daughter,
Yep.
that's interested in baseball or whatever, but bring him to something like this. That would be
Yep.
amazing, you know.
Yeah.
Something she'll never forget. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
all right. Well, okay, we're going to do this again. Too fun. We're going to
Yes.
pick different topics,
Yep.
hopefully every month, and in
Sure.
between I'll have other guests on. But then I get to ask you. It's like my husband always laughs at me because he's like, "You have an expert for everything," because that's something radio people we do. It's like that's why I've learned so much as an adult. It's like I'll just get experts on and I get to ask them all these questions. So I
Hey, it's
thank you
fun
for
for me
this
too.
time.
This was fun.
Oh, yay, awesome. Well, oh, and tell people where to get your books. I know that they're
You can get them
available.
on
So,
Amazon, but or you can go right to the publisher, which is McFarland, out of North Carolina.
okay. And how many did you say you have?
So I have 6 total.
Okay, I was gonna say five, six. Okay, and are they all on baseball?
Yes,
All right, there we
yeah,
go. Lots of fun reading. Summer fun reading. How perfect reading about baseball. So, all
absolutely,
right. Boy, I really appreciate the time and we'll see you next month for sure, if not sooner.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
All right, take care.